Welcome to The Other 51, the podcast where your favorite writers come on to talk about their work, their craft, their secrets, and everything in between. My name is Brian Morris. Thank you for listening on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. And this month, this is a doozy. I'm very excited about this one. My guest is a writer and editor who spent many, many years at Sports Illustrated, probably writing stories that I read growing up and didn't even realize it as a subscriber. And he's also the author of 2 books, including Touch 'Em All. Very excited to have Larry Keith. Welcome to The Other 51.
Brian, thank you so much. I'm absolutely delighted to be here with you.
I'm thrilled to have yet another Charlotte writer based here. We had Joe Posnanski on a couple months ago. It's kind of how we connected, but very nice to have the other Queen City represented. As a Buffalo kid, that we're the Queen City, so it's nice to have
My
the two
goodness,
Queen
right.
cities.
Well, Joe actually was very nice, provided a terrific blurb for Touch 'Em All, and it was so good I put it on the cover.
It was
So I got more than my money's worth.
fantastic. So I want to start off just kind of walking us through your career. So you spent many years at Sports Illustrated, but how did you get your start in journalism, and kind of walk us through your career getting to SI?
Well, I decided that I wanted to be a sports writer at a very young age. I was probably 14 years old. My dad was in radio and did a lot of sports programming, play-by-play. He did the University of Florida one year when we lived in Jacksonville. So that he took me to Griffith Park here in Charlotte in 1961 for 25 games. That was the year of the Maris Mantle home run chase. So I was indoctrinated into sports, and I discovered that I enjoyed writing. I liked to write. I remember as maybe 12, 13 years old, they said, well, what do you want for your birthday? And I picked a baseball encyclopedia. So I was all in. I won a sports writing award for the state of North Carolina while in high school.
Oh.
My dad used that as an opportunity to call Ronald Green, the very well-respected sports editor of the Charlotte News, whom he knew, and said, Ron, my son has won this award. Give him a job. Why don't you hire him? And because Ron had started as an intern at the News his junior year of high school, and that's what I would be entering into, he said, yeah, we'll give him a chance. And so I started covering high school football on Friday nights in the fall of 1963. And that was my beginning. I interned at the News for 6 years, off and on through college and summers and so forth, part-time after school sometimes. And then I transferred to Carolina for my junior and senior years. I was sports editor of the Daily Tar Heel, sports director of the local radio station my senior year, WCHL. I was doing a Dean Smith show before and after every basketball game, so I got to know Dean very well. And then I decided that I still wanted to be a sports writer, but I wanted to do it only at Sports Illustrated. And that was rather high-minded of me, I believe. But the reason was that I had gotten to know Curry Kirkpatrick, class of 65, who loved Carolina and loved coming back to Chapel Hill. And then a friend of mine who was a year ahead of me in school, I called him up one day and I said, Sandy, I was trying to rub it in. He'd been sports editor of the Daily Tar Heel the year before. I said, Sandy, I just won a big award. He said, oh, really? What was that? I said, best sports writer, college sports writer in North and South Carolina. He said, well, that's very impressive, Larry. He said, I have some news for you too. I said, come on, what's that? He said, I was just hired at Sports Illustrated. So that clinched it. That's where I set my star. I did something very foolish. I had a chance to go for an interview. Now I've graduated from Carolina. I'm working at a radio station in Charlotte. And they say, we want to fly. We want you to come interview for a job. And I said, I can't do it. I can't afford to fly up for the interview. A little bit after that, I won another award for radio, National Headliner Club Award for Radio, Public Service Broadcasting. Coincidentally, the award ceremony was going to be in Atlantic City. Big coincidence was Curry called and said, Larry, are you still interested in working in Sports Illustrated? I said, boy, absolutely. I said, I'm not really cut out for radio. And he said, well, you'll get a call. And this time, because the radio station was flying me to the New York area, that wasn't an excuse. So the award ceremony in Atlantic City was that weekend, Friday, Saturday. Sunday morning, I took a bus into New York City, the Time and Life building, and on Wednesday, I was hired. So that's the long version of how it happened, but there were so many little ironies along the way.
That is fantastic. Before we get to SI, I do want you brought up covering football, high school football on Friday nights, and that's how I got my start.
Yeah,
That's how so many of us got our starts.
sure.
And so, what is it, you know, without looking back too much with rose-colored glasses at at your first job or that first job, but what is it about high school Friday night high school football that is just so kind of formative for so many journalists? Do you think?
That's a very interesting question. Charlotte was this was well in advance of pro football, pro basketball, and other major sports in Charlotte. So high school football was a big deal.
Hmm.
So to have the chance to cover high school football and for an afternoon paper, which
Hmm.
means I didn't have to bat out a story immediately after the game, I could write it with more of a feature-ish angle. I think that certainly helped my own career development.
Okay.
Uh, High school football mattered. I didn't cover the biggest games each week by any means, but I covered games in which there was a lot of interest, and that was an incentive to continue. In the summers, I was covering American Legion baseball. We had a Class A minor league baseball team here, so American Legion was very big in Charlotte. So I'll also mention that I covered one golf tournament my whole life. It was a Charlotte amateur golf tournament. I'd never been on a golf course before in my life. I'm covering this local golf championship, and I remember the eventual winner, Dr. Bob Watson, a dentist. I'll never forget his name. He had a tee shot on the first tee, and I start walking down the fair. No, he's teeing up on the first tee. I start walking down the fairway. He said, Larry, you can't do that. He said, I might hit you. And so that was my first lesson of covering a golf tournament.
So you get to Sports Illustrated in 1970. You're there through the early 2000s. I'll get specific in a little bit, but this is gonna sound like such a weird general question, but what was it like there during that time? Because that's part of the golden era of SI.
Yeah.
I was kind of started in the 60s and kind of probably into the a
Yeah.
long time on it.
Yeah.
But just in general, what was it like to be at SI back then?
The magazine was hiring young wannabes, of which I was definitely a wannabe,
Mhm.
um, to be in the company of some very well established, well known writers. Guys like my friend Kirkpatrick, who by this time was very well known, but Frank Deford, Dan Jenkins, John Underwood. The list could go on, and we felt like we were walking among the mortals. We we thought we were in Valhalla,
Hmm.
and now the people that I was hired with ultimately became successful writers too. In fact, one young man, John Papanek, became not only a very good writer, but the editor of Sports Illustrated for Kids, the editor of Sports Illustrated, and the editor of ESPN the magazine. So they were bringing in talent. Not everybody made it. A lot of very good writers wound up moving on to newspapers. One young woman by the name of Melissa Ludke uh, went from Sports Illustrated to Time, and she has but her claim to fame at Sports Illustrated was that she was the plaintiff in the lawsuit that opened up locker rooms for women. There you go, locker
Literally
room.
have it right next to me. Yeah.
There it is. Well, she's a great, if you haven't already, absolutely
Uh,
talk to her.
she's on the list. Yes.
She's excellent,
Yeah.
but her story is historic.
Hmm.
And she was while all this happened with Bowie Kuhn, I was a writer, she was a baseball reporter, and I was totally unaware of what was going on. She was playing it very close to the vest. So there were some notable people in the bullpen, as we called it, warming up for whatever the future laid in store.
So one of the people who I'm fascinated by from that era, Andre Laguerre, the editor and the managing editor. I know you kind of got there toward the end of his tenure at Sports Illustrated, but I'm curious, what kind of interactions or work you had with, or what was like his presence in SI? Because by that time, he's probably already
He has an
legendary.
aura,
Yeah.
absolutely. An extraordinary background. He was a Frenchman. He was Charles de Gaulle's press secretary during World War II. Uh, but as a child, he had lived in St. Louis and had become a big Cardinals baseball fan.
Hmm.
His father was some ambassadorial position of some type. And and so he knew American sports. After the war, he was hired by Life and then came to Sports Illustrated as assistant managing editor and then managing editor. And
Hmm.
he was the managing editor who put SI on the map.
Yeah.
He took advantage of, he realized that America's sports passion was dictated largely by what they could see on television,
Hmm.
especially pro football. He embraced pro football. Uh, he he was also known to take a drink, but he was like a lot of people on the staff at that time. You had to get to him before lunchtime. There's one particular Andre Laguerre story that I will treasure forever. I'm a writer reporter, which means I've gone from reporter to writer reporter. I'm showing promise. The kid has a chance. He might make it.
Mhm.
They send me out to cover a, uh, a lacrosse story in Baltimore, where else? And I do a pretty good job. Now, on Monday, magazine closes on Sundays. On Mondays, my job, I had a little side job to go down to the HoHo Bar with Bill Leggett, who was the magazine's noted baseball writer. And he would come by around 5 o'clock and say, "Come on, let's go down to the HoHo." Uh, so I would go down and drink a beer, and he's drinking beer and so forth. And Andre walks in with his entourage, Dan Jenkins, Tex Small, Maury Werner, not a known writer, but a friend of Andre's. And so my job was to slink away, was to get out of there fast. As I'm doing that, Laguerre says, Mr. Keith, why don't you join us for a drink? Well, my gosh, I can't tell you. Why don't you?
Yeah.
So I say, well, thank you, Andre. So I have a drink and then I'm sort of shooting along. Well, that was being anointed. So I thought I was given an immediate assignment for the next week to cover a track event in Encino, California. I write the story. I come back sitting at the bar on a Monday with William Leggett. Laguerre comes in with his entourage. He doesn't even look at me. Not a word, not a whisper, nothing at all. I had not done a very good job on that story.
Hmm.
And so my the comet that had been going across the heavens had crashed. And but for that one moment the week before, I could,
So you mentioned that you were a writer and writer reporter. So what was like that progression like within Sports Illustrated, like where you got hired and then the different titles and kind of
yeah.
how you worked your way up?
We were hired as by title reporters.
Okay.
What a reporter was a fact checker. of the stories that the writers wrote. And that's something that Henry Luce, the founder of Time Magazine and Time Inc., Fortune, all the other magazines under the umbrella, that was his creation. It was very smart, very, very smart. And we were schooled in the importance of accuracy. As someone on the baseball beat, I was schooled on the importance of cutting out the box scores from every game played the previous night and pasting them in a black spiral notebook. That
Okay.
was one of the details of the job. Um, if you got a few writing assignments and did well, you were promoted to writer reporter. When I was promoted to writer reporter, my wife and I went to the Plaza Hotel, a restaurant there at the time that served Mai Tais, and we had a celebration. It was a big deal
Right.
in terms of advancement.
Yeah.
And then a couple of years after that, I continued to write. Had some pretty good assignment. I covered the U.S. Open finals one year. I became a staff writer, and it was immediately put on the baseball beat and the college basketball beat.
So you wrote, I think if I'm getting this number correctly in your book, 19 cover stories for
19 cover.
SI. So walk me through what's that process? What was that process of writing a cover story?
It's it wasn't like Time magazine, for example. It was really the individual effort of the writer um, on the assignment.
Okay.
I said it wasn't Time magazine because uh, Time writers would work from voluminous files. The story would be written by a writer in the office. Reporters would be out sending in the information, the details.
Mhm.
The covers that I wrote and every other writer wrote were primarily news stories.
Okay.
Now, occasionally there would be a feature story, a profile. Dan Jenkins and was particularly adept at doing either. He covered golf and college football, news stories, the Masters, the big college football game of the week. Um, so he was adept at both. I never was invited to write a bonus piece, as the long pieces were called. I did write a number of feature wells, which were shorter bonus pieces, profiles of people, but that was it was the individual writing, and sometimes abetted by a reporter who would travel with you.
Okay.
Uh, there was always a reporter assigned to check the story, and sometimes they would go out and help you report the story. But at the end of the day, it was literally at the end of the day, you were in your hotel room typing it out, and it would appear on the certain. I mean, I was the lead college basketball writer
Mhm.
for a while. I covered the very famous Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, 1979
Sure.
Final Four. I mean, that was an obvious cover story.
Yeah.
But other cover stories I did were much less obvious. I think they were probably had as much to do with the quality of the photography as my writing. Some of them were very big major stories. I mean, the contretemps between Billy Martin and Reggie Jackson.
Mhm.
That story landed on the cover. We would do a rookie story, top rookie story each year. Kirk Gibson, for example,
Mhm.
and Pete Rose's hitting streak, a news story that as one of the lead baseball writers I did. So the quality of the story was not always the deciding factor, though.
It's interesting hearing you talk about this and remembering Sports Illustrated obviously being weekly back then, that it was really a sports news magazine.
Yeah.
Like it was very much covering the Final Four, the World Series, the NBA Final, like all of the it serving the purpose that like the Athletic or ESPN.com does today for anybody
Yeah.
younger who's listening. Like it was not just features, it was the news stuff. So kind of walk me through. I didn't realize you wrote the cover story from the '79 Final Four. That event, just is such looking back, it's such a landmark event
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
college basketball and kind of leading into the NBA and in basketball. Take me through writing that story. I mean, do you know that back then, was it a seismic feeling back then? Was it just like, walk me through what it was like trying to write that, and now looking back on it and realizing that how big an event that was in sports history.
The I'll preface by saying that at the beginning of the season, the preseason basketball issue, I wrote a cover story on Magic Johnson.
Okay.
So I'd gotten to know Magic. Now the season ends, and Larry Bird has emerged, leader of an unbeaten team. Magic Johnson has been spectacular. So, yes, it was recognized in advance as a seismic event. It is still the highest rated basketball game, pro or college, that's ever been viewed. Um, Unfortunately, and this is my defense, unfortunately, the game did not live up to the billing.
Right.
Um, I wound up now I'm writing on deadline. In fact, my deadline was ahead of the AP
Oh,
reporters,
wow.
as I recall. I mean, I had pre-written stuff from the semifinals and had to put a top on it from the championship game. Well, covering the championship game, the star player for Michigan State was really Terry Donnelly, a little
Yeah.
guard. In fact, he had this great quote that one of my reporters scurrying around the floor immediately after the game said, "Hey, I got a good quote from Terry Donnelly," and it was that, "Hey, Magic was passing the ball to me. He'd never done that before." But little Terry Donnelly, point guard, had a great game. Magic was on the cover, leading scorer. He and Greg Kelser connected on some great plays. But any clear view of the game, covering the game, Terry Donnelly, once in his life, was a star. At the same time, Larry Bird, maybe the worst game he ever played in college. He was just he was mediocre, to say the least. And I wrote it that way. Um, Years later, ESPN interviewed me about this game, and I said something. I wanted to write the best story I could, and that's the quote they ran. But the end of the quote, which they cut off, and I know you would never do it.
Never, never.
I said, I wanted to write the best story I could, but I didn't.
Hmm.
I did not write a story to the magnitude of the moment that it became. The game itself as a moment was a disappointment.
Right.
The aftermath was huge, and it changed the course of professional basketball.
It is funny when you look back at stories that you write, especially on deadline, right? That like the like it's a deadline story, so you just kind of go with what's in front of you or what's your gut, and sometimes you look back and like that game deserved a better what it
Yeah,
became deserved a better
yeah,
story,
yeah.
and but it just I remember covering St. Bonaventure when they played Kentucky in the NCAA's in 2000. It was my first year on the beat, and looking back on the stories, they weren't. I mean, they were terrible. I want to say they were terrible, but they were not
No,
as good as they could have been, or should have. I like feeling like they should have
yeah,
been for what it
no.
meant to the school and meant to the community. And it just, it's
I know the
deadline.
feeling because
Yeah.
that was exactly how I felt about the Indiana State, Michigan State game. It was, I covered the game, but not the moment.
Yep. So one of your claims to fame at Sports Illustrated in your time as as an editor is hiring a certain sports writer from Colorado named Rick Reilly, who obviously became
Yeah.
one of those names that you don't need an introduction to around Sports Illustrated. Um, Tell me about what jumped out about young Rick Reilly, pre Sports Illustrated Rick Reilly, to you.
Uh, he sent in a an envelope, big manila envelope filled with clips. And I was assistant managing editor, and they came to me to read and evaluate. Well, it did not take long, like two or three articles in, that this kid had it. He was superb. And I probably finished reading the clips that he sent. But I went into the managing editor, Mark Mulvoy, and I said, I've just read a packet of clippings from a writer at the LA Times. We got to hire. This guy's terrific. Mark said, "Oh, well, good." He said, "Well, why don't you give him to Ken? Let's see what he says." Ken Rudine was the executive editor. So Ken read them and agreed that this Reilly youngster was very, very good. So Mark said, get in touch with him. So I called him. We had a long discussion. It was clear he wanted to come to Sports Illustrated. It was clear that Sports Illustrated was interested in his coming to SI. But he said something that was very notable, and I later used in the hiring process. He said he wanted to be the next Frank Deford. That was his ambition. And Frank, of course, a superb, very well-known writer. And I said, well, why don't you come out, spend some time with us, and let's talk about this. So he came out. My wife and I took him and his then wife to a very, very fancy French restaurant, La Côte Basque in New York. It no longer exists, but it was like the premier restaurant in the city at the time. We were trying to impress him, obviously. Mark took him out and played golf, and we made him an offer. And he said, great, I'm coming. I said, well, Mark, I said, Rick, you got to be aware of something. The Times is not going to let you go easily. They are going to be very much intent on keeping you. Well, sure enough, he went back to LA, called and said, you're right. They've made a counter offer. And I said, well, what's that? Now, as I recall, they offered to double his salary, which meant he wasn't making very much money at all. They promised him the column when it came opened to be the lead columnist at the LA sports columnist at the LA Times, replacing Jim Murray.
Yeah.
And they said, if you want national exposure, at that time, the LA Times owned the Sporting News.
That's right.
So they said, we'll let you have a column in the Sporting News. And he called and he's telling me this. And I said, well, Rick, I said, that's a great offer. But I said, you won't be the next Frank Deford staying in Los Angeles. Now, I think we increased his starting salary a little bit. We gave him a bonus. It wasn't what the Times was offering. And that's how we landed Rick Reilly the first time. There's a great anecdote here. My son becomes a writer at Sports Illustrated and an editor at Sports Illustrated also. He's doing a series for the internet on the 60 best stories in the history of SI. His dad was not included in this. And in talking to Rick, Ted Keith, my son, says, would you ever be interested in coming back to SI? Because Rick had left SI to go to ESPN for, I believe it was $1 million a year. That's my recollection. And he said, I might be, yeah. That more conversation ensued, and he wound up coming back to Sports Illustrated. So Rick's, for a while at least, and so Rick's SI career was bookended by Larry, Keith, and Ted.
That's fantastic. So thinking about looking at SI from the time you were there, for so many of us in my generation, we were talking about Seth Wickersham, I think earlier, and me and him have talked about what SI meant to us kind of growing up as, just such an ideal of sports journalism. From your perspective being there, obviously you've got the talented writers that are there, but what made SI then so special?
I think because we were the one and only, for one thing. The Sporting News was a weekly, but at the time concentrated on baseball.
Right.
Sport Magazine was a monthly. I thought Sport had some very good writers, but they couldn't be timely. there was a time where I was not interested in working at Sports Illustrated when I wanted to be a sports writer because the SI in its early years would have a dog on the cover.
Right.
I mean, it just wasn't hard sports enough for this kid growing up in Charlotte. I think by the time I arrived, SI had established its niche as the authority,
Mhm.
and it wasn't. It was more than the authority. It was brilliant in its execution. We had the best writers. We had the best photographers. Um, we had brilliant senior editorial leadership in Andre Laguerre, uh, and it all came together. Uh, at its heyday, when I was there, the magazine had a circulation of over 3 million and readership of, I think it was like 21 million or something incredible. So we knew that we were providing essential sports information for a sports-minded crowd. In fact, in those days of the 1970s, um, there was reading SI for someone on the East Coast. They were learning things that had happened the previous weekend on the West Coast.
Right.
It was so that was, our niche. That was the responsibility that we felt, and we were very excited, but also proud to do it.
So coming to the end here, we could talk hours and tell stories for hours, but coming to the end here, I want to wrap up our conversation with a question that I ask all of my guests that I have on. And the spirit of the question is, to be a good writer, you have to read good stuff and to expose yourself. So, Larry Keith, what is the best thing that you've read lately?
Well, I'll tell you. I'm very interested in the revolutionary period of America. And this long predates the 250th bicentennial celebration. I am presently within 25 pages of finishing a reread of David McCullough's biography of John Adams.
Oh, that's a good one.
I think he won the Pulitzer Prize.
Yeah.
It is a brilliant book. The detail is spectacular. This will lead me to want to reread some other biographies of that era. I have a very impressive, to me, library of books covering people, events, personalities from this period. So I'm a nonfiction fan. I don't read many, except for John Grisham. I read a lot of John Grisham, but that's a whole different story.
So, if as a history fan, as a fellow history fan, I will
Yes.
recommend another book. In June, I had on on my podcast Bob Crawford, who wrote a book about John Quincy Adams, America's founding
Yes.
son, and it
Yes. Yes.
is remarkably. It is obviously a very different type of book than a McCullough biography, but just a very great book on that, on not just Quincy Adams, but that era of American history, kind of between the War of 1812 and the Civil War, that kind of focus on the 1830s and 40s. Fascinating
Thanks for the
time.
reminder. I'm aware of the book. I'm reading, of course, about John Quincy even now
Mhm.
in the John Adams biography. I still want to reread Hamilton and Jefferson and Washington, all these people in my library, but I will definitely add at your recommendation, thank you very much,
Well,
John Quincy Adams.
and Bob is a North Carolina guy, a Concord, North Carolina guy. So we cannot. It is just this.
It is something in the air. That's
There's
all
some,
I can say.
this is a North Carolina centric podcast, I guess, and that's all right. But that is Larry Keith. I'll put a link to his books and more will be in the show notes. And this was wonderful. We'll have to do this again and tell some more stories, Larry. I
Thank
appreciate
you
your
so
time.
much. Greatly appreciate the opportunity, and it was great fun talking to you.
Absolutely. So thank you all for listening to The Other 51. We do this about once a month, and you can read more of my work on Substack at Sports Media Guy. Jen Moritz does our graphics. Ellie Moritz wrote our theme song. I'm Brian, and I will talk to you next time.